I've been approaching girls and helping students approach girls for the last 20 years. And in that time, I've seen a lot. I've seen what works, and I've seen what doesn't. And today I'm gonna go through your openers and tell you what's good, what's bad, and what's just plain ugly. Hey guys, what's up? This one's for you, quite literally. I went on our Facebook group, Todd V Insiders, get on it if you're not on it, and I asked you guys what openers you guys use, what openers you want to hear about, and I've ranked them best to worst, literally the openers you care about. Let's look at them right now. First opener we're going to look at is one of the most common openers I see guys use all the time. It's, hey, I know this is random, but I had to tell you you're cute. Okay, so what's good and what's bad about this opener? The good things about this opener are, at least you're getting to the point, you're not beating around the bush, you're actually coming in as a man and you are conveying that you're there as a man to a woman, you're at least confident enough to put that out there. Also, the fact that you say, hey, I think this is random, there is some little bit of social calibration there. The fact that you understand that doing a cold approach is not the most typical thing, that it's not a totally normal thing, and that she might be put off by it. And so there is a little bit of social calibration there. However, I personally have a beef with this opener for two reasons, okay? Number one, the random part, and number two, the I just had to tell you part. Okay, so first of all, the I just had to tell you you're cute. It implies you just came over to give a compliment and then you're gonna leave. And so it gives the girl a lot of leeway to potentially be like, oh, okay, thank you, and then just walk off or something like that. And it also means that you're gonna have to follow it up with something. The opener doesn't carry much water. It just gets you to, hi, I thought you were cute, and then there's this pregnant pause that you just have to fill with something else. So you have to open again afterwards. So I don't particularly love that aspect of it. My second issue is this, hey, I know this is random. Now, I mentioned earlier that good part about it in quotes is that you're acknowledging that a cold approach can be awkward and you're sort of giving yourself a softer landing, or you're relieving potentially some of that awkwardness, some of that tension. However, the very fact that you're mentioning it could be awkward puts it into her head that it might be awkward, and that's not going to serve you. You're basically asking to be treated as a guy who's medium attractive, right? The fact that you recognize it could be awkward means you're not totally socially uncalibrated and you didn't grow up in a barn. However, the fact that you recognize it could be awkward means you anticipate a negative reaction. You're worried about a negative reaction, which says, by kind of implied social proof, that you've had negative reactions in the past. You don't always get a good reaction, which is not something a truly confident or truly high value guy would be thinking. So this is a very leveled opener. This is an opener that it will definitely say that you're not a guy who's a 5 or below on the attractiveness scale, but it's also really strongly saying that you're not a guy who's a 9 or 10 on the attractiveness scale. So overall, I would give this opener a below average score. So we're going to put this in C tier. However, with an asterisk. So this is in C tier overall. It's not a very good opener really. However, I will give you that if you're a beginner and you want to use this opener, by all means go ahead and do it. Why? Well, the fact of the matter is being a little leveled as a beginner in terms of your game isn't that bad. If your opener screams, I'm a 6 or a 7 or maybe an 8, and then the rest of your game is at the level of a 6 or a 7 or an 8, it's nice that you actually establish that right away. Also, as a beginner, the fact that this opener is going to give you some soft landings, and the fact that because this opener is polite, if you have a lot of approach anxiety, it might just get you opening when you're afraid to open otherwise. For those reasons, if you are a beginner, by all means use it, but use it with the knowledge that you're going to have to evolve past it at some point when you become intermediate to advanced. So overall, it's definitely a below average opener. I'd give it about C tier on this tier list. However, as a beginner, it's probably more like a B plus type of an opener. It's decent, it's fine, and if you need it as a crutch, by all means, as a beginner, it's fine. The next opener we have is the very ballsy, sorry I'm late opener, which is where you walk into a group or even sit down potentially with a group and you say, hey guys, sorry I'm late, and then you go from there. This is a really interesting opener. This is an opener that a lot of guys think is an awful opener. Even I've seen prank channels use it as hey, I'm going to do this crazy opener. But the funny thing about it is I actually think it's a pretty good opener. I've had lots of success with it. I've seen students get lots of success with this opener. It's actually not a bad opener, even though it is ballsy and even potentially uncalibrated. Now, I do want to say it depends how you do it. If you just jump down hey guys, sorry I'm late, that's not so good. But if you actually act the role as a legitimate thing, then it really works. It's kind of a lesson I learned in improvisational comedy. When you're in a crazy scenario or a crazy scene, if you try and act crazy in a crazy scene, everything just goes to crazy town. It just gets wacky and it's not funny, it's not interesting, it's just weird. However, if you're in a crazy scenario and you act completely normal and completely as though that scenario is just where you are and you're a completely normal sane individual in it, it actually works really, really well. So if you put on this whole like, hey, look at me, I'm late, I'm doing my big pickup opener, it's incredibly awful. However, if you're like, hey guys, sorry I'm late, look, like Uber, anyway, forget about it. But yeah, how are you guys doing? Right? And you just completely act it. And if they do the, hey, who are you? You're like, oh my God, look, I know I was late, I know you're pissed off, but come on, let's not go there. And you actually play it out and go with it. Or at that point, you just get normally like, hey, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. Hi, nice to meet you. If you can act normal afterwards, it's fine. If you make the whole thing, cause it's a kind of a clowny opener, a little bit. But if you become a clown doing the opener, you're going to be in trouble. If you can be very normal doing the opener and just play it in a high value way, you'll actually do fine. This is an opener that I would recommend specifically to guys who are at least intermediate and ideally getting towards advanced, because the problem with beginners is they're probably going to do it in a shy, unconfident way, and it's going to be very incongruent and come off very bad. If you're intermediate, you're more likely probably to do it in that kind of clownish way that, hey, look at my crazy pickup line kind of way. But if you've had some decent success with girls, you've had, if you actually had results from full cold approach before, in that case, this is a fun opener to try, and it's one that actually can work. It's also just good for mixing it up and keeping things interesting. Like you've done a lot of direct openers and compliment openers. It is really nice to mix it up and to keep game fun. There is a reason why they call it the game rather than the work. So I actually really do like this opener. My one objection to the opener is that it is a little bit gimmicky, right? So it's not a universal opener you can use everywhere. And if you start trying to use it everywhere, you're going to look gimmicky. It also is a bit of a crutch in terms of it's going to kind of stunt your growth in overall game because you're going to be relying on the kind of more absurd reactions you're getting from it. So this should not be your go-to opener. It should not be your all-the-time opener by any means, but it is nice in certain particular situations and can be used as a supplement. So actually, may surprise you, I'm going to give this opener, we'll give it an A tier, maybe like A minus kind of a tier rating. It's very, very good. I have no problem with it. By all means, use it. The one thing I will say is if you're using this opener more than about 20-30% of the time, you probably are being too gimmicky and relying on crutches in your game. But it's a great one to throw in, great one to mix it up. And I don't think there's anything technically wrong with it as long as you're advanced enough to do it correctly. Do not use this one if you're beginner and probably not if you're intermediate. The next opener we're going to talk about is one of the most commonly used openers anywhere. It's also one that if you've never learned game and you try and figure out by yourself, you're likely to use. And it's also one a lot of pickup instructors who are kind of intermediate recommend. And this opener is the, hey, I saw you from across the street and I knew I'd be kicking myself if I didn't come over here and talk to you. And why is it so commonly used? Well, it just makes sense. It's honest and sincere. It's probably what you were actually thinking, right? So this idea of like, be yourself, be congruent, be honest, just say who you really are. It makes a lot of sense to say that. Also, girls will tell you, be honest, be sincere, etc. Also, a lot of people who teach pickup, sorry to say it, are actually fairly intermediate. And that's actually kind of okay. Intermediates can teach beginners and can teach them a lot. So I'm not hating on anybody, but it is definitely an opener that is far from advanced. And here's the reason why. First of all, hey, I saw you from across the street and I had to come over. All right, so what does that say to the girl? It says, I've been watching you for at least some period of time. This opener did not happen spontaneously. It is an intentional thing. I came over here with the specific intention to meet you. Now, on one hand, at least you're not hiding your intentions. So you're not being a little like beat around the bush wussy man, okay? So at least there's that. However, it's anything but spontaneous. By saying, I saw you from across the street, I came over here, it's saying agenda, agenda, agenda. I had an outcome in mind. I'm not just here in the moment. I came over with a purpose. I.e., I want something, i.e., you're on a pedestal, i.e., I have ulterior motives and agenda, all of which is bad, bordering a little tiny bit on creepy. Okay, so I really don't like this, hey, I saw you from across the street and I came over here. It's much better if the open is spontaneous. It's much better if the open happened the second you noticed her and it seemed almost instinctive because then it just happened, which is a key idea for a lot of girls and their kind of fantasy of how they would like an approach to go and how they would like romance to go. The second thing is this idea of I'd be kicking myself if I didn't talk to you, which is very flattering. It's very nice. It's very honest for a lot of guys because that's how we feel when we don't do the approach. We kick ourselves afterwards. I get it. But for the girl, the idea that you would be kicking yourself after talking to her says that she stood out for you. Yes, that's flattering. Yes, it's a compliment. It also says she's out of your league. It says you don't normally talk to girls of her caliber. It says you don't normally date girls of her caliber. And if you don't normally date girls of that caliber, there's probably a reason. There's probably something wrong with you. Not actually wrong, but something lower tier or lower value from you that is not quite at their level, and they're going to notice that, and you're going to get that very leveled response. So this is, again, one of those openers that's very leveled. It has some good qualities about it. That honesty, that directness, the not hiding your intentions is positive, but you are shooting yourself in the foot in a couple ways right off the open, which I really, really dislike. So I'm going to give this opener a slightly below average rating. I'm going to make this one C tier. I really particularly don't like this one. I think there are a lot of versions of this where you eliminate the I'd be kicking myself and you eliminate that I saw you from across the street. Those are two things you don't need to say. You just say, hey, I saw you and I thought you were cute, without any of that other stuff, and you've just improved the opener considerably. That one is at least a tier, maybe 2 tiers higher already, just by eliminating those bad elements. So this element, as phrased, is definitely below average. I'm giving it C tier. Next opener is this. Hey, you're almost as cute as me. What's your name? Okay. Now, here's what I like about this opener, and here's what I dislike about this opener. I'm a big fan of an opener that's a little bit cocky. I don't mind shit tests. A shit test as a response to an opener is great because it means you're getting a response, it means you're getting a reaction from her, and it gives you an opportunity to immediately set yourself apart. So I'm quite fine with a cocky opener, even a slightly overly cocky opener, which this definitely is. It's overly cocky. However, it's very clunky overly cocky. It comes up as gimmicky. It comes off as, this is my pickup line. This is my thing that I do to girls. And so for that reason, it comes off a little bit cheesy as well as overly cocky. So I'm a big fan of provoking a shit test off the open because you've made an impact, but I'm not a big fan of provoking a shit test because you've given her a reason to object and made that impact. And I believe this opener does that. It is a little bit too gimmicky. It also doesn't really flow, right? Hey, you're almost as cute as me. What's your name? It's cocky, kind of a compliment, and then it's what's your name right afterwards, right? And so in that moment where you've actually provoked the shit test quite potentially by being cocky, you're now asking her for something. And there's this idea in game of you shouldn't escalate off a shit test. Now, granted, she hasn't given you the shit test yet, but because you're very likely to get a shit test off of this, that escalation of asking for her name is probably not appropriate here and probably not high percentage at the very least. And I know you're thinking to yourself, asking for her name, how's that an escalation? Well, here's the thing. When you're asking for a name, it's a hit or miss moment. Because most of the time, just out of social politeness, they'll give you a name. A decent amount of the time, nice people will. But again, you've been overly cocky, so you've given yourself a lower chance of that politeness working in your favor. And imagine she doesn't. Imagine you say, hey, you're almost as cute as me. What's your name? And she goes, why should I tell you? Or I don't give my name to strangers. Now where are you? So it's this opener that's very gimmicky, very hit or miss, and you've also set it up so that she's more likely to give the negative answer than she would have been without the cocky bit. So when this opener works, and it gets like, haha, that's cute, that's clever, I'm this, when it works, it can work in a very decent way. But it's going to alienate and not work with a much higher percentage of girls than necessary, so it's just not particularly well calibrated. But I do like openers that are a little bit cocky. I do like openers that get a response, especially if you're in an intermediate level. There aren't that many openers that are like strictly intermediate openers. This is actually kind of a decent intermediate opener. It's definitely leveled, but when it works, it will work in a decent enough way, and if you're willing to take the rejections, it could be okay. So I'm going to call this opener average. I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give it B tier, but I will say this is very specifically an intermediate opener. You will not be able to use it for a very long time when you're a beginner. You won't be able to use it very well when you're advanced. It's for a very specific point in your learning curve and you will outgrow it quickly. But for that point in your curve, it could actually work relatively well. Next opener I want to talk about is the opener Hey Trouble, or Hey Trouble, probably a better delivery of it. In any case, the opener Hey Trouble. What is good about this? What's bad about this opener? Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of the word trouble or troublemaker. You may have heard me, especially a few years ago, this would have been a very go-to opener of mine. Hey, you look like trouble, or hey, troublemaker, or something like that. Hey, you look like trouble is more likely the one I would go with. But there's a very big difference between hey, you look like trouble and hey, trouble. Hey, you look like trouble is making an observation and it's a little incisive and they're going to wonder, why do I look like trouble? Or is that your opinion of me, etc. When you say hey, trouble, you're assuming a lot. You're assuming they've already acknowledged that they're trouble. You're assuming a lot of familiarity because you're already using a pet name with a stranger. So it's a little bit overly bold. You could say the same thing softer and get a much better result. So there's a thing in game and in life of what's called a dominated strategy. If you say this thing has all the positives of this other thing, but none of the negatives, there is no reason to use that one that has the negatives. And this is a dominated strategy because hey, trouble is just flat worse than something like, hey, you look like trouble, or hey, troublemaker even is better than hey, trouble. So for that reason, I just dislike it. Now, can this work? Yes, it can. It is leveled. It is overly bold. And so for those reasons, I'm going to call it B tier. It can work at a certain level of intermediate and it will work well at that level, but it definitely will hold you back when you're advanced, and definitely if you're a beginner, you're not going to be able to pull it off. So it's for a very narrow sliver. It can work relatively well. It's fairly average, but it's just a little bit too bold. It's a little too gimmicky. I don't like it in the long run. All right, this next one, don't shoot the messenger, okay? The next messenger, and this was put on the Facebook group, so not my fault, is you've got the best dick-sucking lips I've ever seen. All right. I hate this. I flat out fully hate this, top to bottom, think it's awful, don't ever use it. Okay. Now, first let's get into what possibly could be good about it. What could be good about it is that at least you're being bold, at least you're being sexual, and the times that it works, if it does work, if a girl responds to you after you saying this, there's a decent chance she's pretty down and she might have sex with you, right? So that's good. If you get a positive response, it could be a very positive response. And I suppose if you had absolutely no game whatsoever and you were trying to close directly from your opener, you're trying to have an opener that like will fail, but that one drunk girl that says yes, it might work all the way. Okay, if your game is that awful, maybe it could work. But here's why in general I hate this opener. For every opener you use, you're going to get a certain percentage of girls that are yeses, a certain percentage that are maybes, and a certain percentage that are nos. And the goal is to get some yeses so that you're actually making progress with the opener and there was a point to it, but not to get so many nos that you're just whittling down your sample size to a pointless number. And this opener is just going to get too many nos, right? There's too many girls that are going to flat out reject it. And while the girls who say yes to it will be a very strong yes, every single one of those girls basically would have responded to a slightly less bold opener that's still sexual and still forward. So you could increase the range of maybes and yeses and decrease the number of nos. So what this means is a softer version of the same kind of an opener would actually get all of the girls that would say yes to this one to say yes, and then it would get far more to say maybe, and actually many more to say yes, right? So it just is a completely better version. This opener is just too upfront, too sexual, etc. A slightly less sexual opener would get a yes from all the same girls, plus many more. Oh, for this reason, by the way, I give this D tier, awful, terrible, worst, don't use it. The next opener is, you look so blank. And the suggestion given here was something of an ethnicity like, you look so German. Okay. Now, do I like this? Do I dislike this? I kind of dislike it. It's okay, but I kind of dislike it. And this may surprise you because a lot of people watch my material and they see that I make what I call mini cold reads. I make these kind of observational statements about a girl. And so they think that, hey, you look so German is a good observational statement. And they think that's like, they're like, hey, Todd, I learned that from you. No, you didn't. I never taught you that. I don't endorse that. It's not a good opener. It's not completely awful. It could work, but it's really just not doing very much. Okay, why is specifically you look German and then the you look X? You look X actually can work, but you look German is bad. So why is that bad? Why is you look German or you look Mexican, you look Canadian, whatever? Why is that bad? Well, number one, you're going to be wrong a lot, right? You're going to be wrong probably more often than you're right in most cases. And so you're going to start the interaction by getting her to say no, which is not something you want as a precedent. You don't want no as a precedent. Number two, if she is German or Mexican or Canadian, so what, right? So what? Now you have to follow it up and you have to open again. So you number one are going to get a no a decent amount of time. Number two, you're not making much progress. And number three, you're not bringing much that's particularly interesting. And also you could even potentially be offensive, right? A lot of people don't like to be identified by their cultural moniker or by where they come from as the first thing by a stranger. They consider it sort of invasive. And so it's kind of too invasive, doesn't make enough progress, and you're often wrong. So for all these reasons, something like you look German, you look French, you look whatever, I don't really like it so much. However, weirdly enough, if you were to get more specific about it and more kind of associative about it, it actually kind of could work. So for example, you look German, I don't like, because you're asking, are you German? However, something I will use is something like you look so New York, or you look so LA, or you look very Paris, or something like that, or you absolutely don't look New York, maybe if you're in New York. Those kind of comments are actually much more interesting because you're not saying, I think you're this, I'm playing a guessing game and hoping I'm right. What you're saying is you have a little bit of this vibe, which is a lot more curiosity inspiring. It's a lot less invasive. It's a lot less kind of like pegging them into a category and saying you must be this thing. So it's actually more lighthearted. It's harder to say no to, and it's more interesting. So changing it from you look German to you seem very New York or something like that is, a very, very big difference. So the you look German, I would give kind of very average, kind of maybe B tier, and that's that's maybe generous, but I'll give it B tier. But the you seem very New York, or you definitely don't look Miami, or something like that, that actually I think is a very good opener, and I'll give that A tier for sure. It's something I use myself, not every single time, not all the time, not as a go-to all-purpose opener, but I've definitely used it many, many times with tons and tons of success. So that slight modification can make a very mediocre opener very, very good. Next opener I throw in is both an opener and a category. The opener, as posted on the Facebook group, was, if two vegans hate each other, do they have beef? So this is like the lame joke opener. And there's various versions of this. There's also like the lame pickup one, the like, how much does a polar bear weigh enough to break the ice, which is actually probably better than this one a little bit. Or did it hurt when you fell from the sky, which is arguably worse because it's not so original, but at least it's more on the point and it's more man to woman. But the lame joke opener, how do I feel about this? I actually don't like it as the lead-in, how it's used here. If you come right in and you say, hey, if two vegans hate each other, do they have beef? I don't like that. But if you actually gave a little like theater to it and gave a little build up to it and then were normal about it afterwards and just got on with it, it could kind of work. So if you're like, hey, excuse me, I have to ask something that's just been on my mind. So real quick, if two vegans, if they hate each other, do they have beef? Right? And then gauge the reaction. If they're like, whatever, I'm just kidding, I'm fucking around. Anyway, I had to come say hi. And then you have to reopen. But at the very least, you showed a little personality. You kind of made it a little bit less of a, hey, I'm coming here just to talk to you. So you avoided the initial rejection you might get with a pure direct opener. So with a little framing it as the old school opinion opener, this one actually could kind of work. The how much do polar bears weigh, or the did it hurt when you fell from heaven, I think are pretty cheesy. Those I would put as just very average, probably B tier. They're kind of the overly bold, overly pick-up-y category, which seems to be a lot of what B tier is apparently for me. However, the actually kind of cheesy random joke, framed the right way with a question on the front and with normality on the backside, I'll still put it as B tier, but I'll put it at the very top of B tier, almost a good opener, and certainly usable. There's no reason if you have good game that you couldn't use it as an opener and have very, very good success. And the nice thing about it is because it's a conversation opener first, if you're good enough to always be man to woman and good enough to turn it flirty afterwards, it is a very low risk opener, which is something I do recommend for more advanced guys. I still don't think it's great, so that's why I'm going to keep it just towards the top of B tier, but it's definitely a usable opener, and you could have a pickup career using this as an opener, as cheesy as it is. I don't recommend it. I do think it's cheesy. I would shoot myself in the head if this was my opener over and over again. I would just get bored with it and I would hate it, and the game would stop being fun for me. But on a purely technical level, if delivered right and with preamble, there's not much wrong with it. If delivered how it's said here, it's awful, and it's probably like at least C tier at best. But with the preamble and with the right framing, done in an expert way, it could almost be a good opener. Next opener, very simple compliment opener. Hey, I adore the look. Okay, now, what do I think of this opener? Well, direct openers, completely fine for me. You do risk a higher rejection rate, and you do risk, if you call it a risk, getting a shit test off the open. So those are the issues with a direct opener. So in general, I'm a fan of direct openers. I don't quite like this one because it's half an opener, okay? Hey, I adore the look is not a complete opener. Because, hey, I adore the look, thanks, and then what? Right? What reaction is she supposed to give that's going to lead you to a good conversation? I mean, she has to be like, oh, I adore your look too, and get really enthusiastic and actually add something, which is not something you should be expecting a girl to do right at the very start, even if she likes you, because she might be confused, she might be nervous, she might not understand. So this is a good start, but it's not a full opener. So as phrased, this is probably C tier as an opener. It's actually quite bad because there's just not enough to it. However, if you were to add something, hey, I adore your looks, I want to come over here and say hi, now it's fine. And now I would say that's an A tier opener. It's not maybe the greatest opener in the world, but it's completely reasonable and good. I've seen plenty of guys that get to definitely high intermediate, even up to an advanced level, using a very simple direct opener of that nature. And I've even done many, many simple direct openers throughout my pickup career, at least in the appropriate situations. So with the rest of the opener added on, it's A tier. I think it's a good opener. It's not the greatest, but it's definitely good, and it's definitely one that you can use nicely at all levels. You can use it beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and it won't really hold you back. Beginner, intermediate will be great. Advanced, it'll only hold you back slightly. So I think with the full opener, it's good. But if it's just, hey, I adore the look, ... that's not a full opener. It's half an opener, and as such, it gets maybe half the score. That would be very low. That'd be C tier. So the next opener is one that's actually new to me, and I think it's quite creative and interesting, and it's something along the lines of this. hey, do you think you can just walk around like that looking so cute this time of day and ruin my whole schedule? That's an interesting one. With perfect delivery, it kind of could work. And the reason it could work is it has phases. It's going to have a phase where she thinks you're accusing her of something or she thinks she did something wrong, and then it's going to dawn on her that you're kidding, and it's going to be kind of like fun and interesting for her, and she might really like it. She might like the humor. The downside, though, is it is a little bit gimmicky, and it's kind of like too clever or too thought out. Anything that's too thought out, even if it's clever, it doesn't look spontaneous. It doesn't look like you just came up with it in the moment. It looks like it's something that's planned. So the problem with this opener is it just looks planned. It looks a bit too much like a pickup line. So it could work, and when it works, it'll work in a big way. But too often, especially at an advanced level, especially with hot girls that get approached a lot, it's going to come off gimmicky and a little bit leveled. So while I do like this and it's fun, and I actually do some similar things to it that I think are A tier, this one I have to give B tier because I think it's just a little bit leveled, just a little tiny bit too gimmicky, unfortunately. Now, if you had had a genuine reaction like, oh my God, you cannot give me that look. You're gonna ruin my whole day. What is this? Something like that comes off more spontaneous and more in the moment can be very good. And I actually do openers like that on a regular basis. And that one, I would say, if it's spontaneous and actually based on a reaction and based on having made eye contact, so it's genuine, I would give that one probably S tier. That's like amazing. And that's actually an opener I go with a lot, which is the girl gives me a limit, oh my God, what is that look? Or who do you think you are? Or something like that. I'd be like, no, right? And it's an instantaneous reaction off of a genuine look. And then the follow-up is not too contrived. So this opener has the seed of something really, really good in it. But because it's too contrived, I have to give it just like it's above average, but not great. However, the better version of this is actually, I think, one of the absolute best openers. It may be one of the very few I'll actually give S tier to, the modified version of this opener. The next opener we have is, I would say hi, but I'm too shy and bashful. Okay. First thing I will say is do not deliver it like that. If you deliver it like that, you're going to appear like a sociopath and it's absolutely not going to work. You have to deliver this as though you know you're joking, and probably you can't deliver it right away with that as your opener. You have to say, hey, excuse me, or something like that before delivering. It probably needs a pre-opener because otherwise it's going to be weird. However, if you are clearly confident, clearly well-dressed, clearly attractive, and the girl is not in bitch mode, so to speak, like she's not all done up and she doesn't have her friends who she has to impress and stuff like that, going over in kind of a cute way and be like, hey, excuse me, I just wanted to, I was going to say hi, but I'm just shy and bashful. I don't even know. But, I guess I'm here, so hi. Right? Something like that could work with some preamble, some hesitation, a little bit more genuineness. That actually could work in a lot of cases and could be pretty decent. And again, you could pull it off. My one issue here is it's not one that you're going to be able to pull off oftentimes with a girl that thinks instantaneously she's better than you. But even a lot of times, very hot girls are not in that situation. So if you're in a relatively semi-social situation to begin with, like at some kind of party or event where people know each other, this would probably be completely fine and kind of cute and fun and whatnot. Or if the girl's just kind of dressed down, dressed casual, it doesn't feel to you like she's in full bitch mode, then this actually could work very, very well. And I'm going to give this a relatively high tier. I'm going to give this, if delivered right, I'll give this with the preamble, with the delivery, with the hey, excuse me, and all that kind of stuff. I'll give this the low end of A tier because it could be pulled off and it could be very, very good. However, if you are a beginner, if the girl legitimately might think that you are shy and bashful, do not use this. This only works if it's ironic. If it's actually self-deprecating, it's bad. If it's ironically self-deprecating, it could work. It's not the absolute best. It's not at the top end of the top tier, or not even in the top tier, but it's definitely above average and it's definitely usable. Next one we're going old school. It's, I love your dress. My grandma has the exact same one. Right? Now, this is what we call a neg, basically. This is like the standard version of neg, is you give a compliment, but the compliment is actually more of an insult than a compliment, or at least more sort of insecurity provoking than positive emotion provoking. Because again, nobody wants to be dressed like somebody's grandma. It's not actually cool. And the idea of a neg is very, very good. It's a useful thing in general. However, here's the key thing. And here's the thing people get wrong about negs. Negs are not insults. Any neg that's insulting is miscalibrated and bad game. But something that's very subtle could actually work. Now, this one's a little too try-hard. This one, when you say my grandma has the same one, it's clear that you're trying to be gamey. It's clear that you're trying to poke her and get a reaction. Be like, I'm trying to be nasty. I'm trying to be that nasty little guy who gets a reaction. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes that guy. So while negs done right are actually brilliant, negs done wrong are just toxic. And they're just very, very bad. So this particular opener, I'm going to have to give C tier. It's definitely not good, even though it has some good elements. However, there are some versions of this opener that are pretty good. I'll give you a version of this opener that would be high B tier, maybe even low A tier, which I've actually seen people that are very good at game use, which is they go, oh man, I love that sweater. It's so cool that you're like trying to bring the 80s thing back. It's bold. Something like that, where it's actually phrased as though it is a legitimate compliment. It's phrased as though you really mean it. And there's nothing that's like this nasty little insulting thing. It's just subtle. It's just subtly saying like, maybe you don't quite get the fashion perfectly, but I appreciate the try, right? That's a pretty good version of this, and that's a much better version. So the key idea here is, and this is true for openers and everything in game, if you're gonna have the subtle little tease and subtle insults, you never wanna come off like you're intentionally trying to be mean. You're just gonna come off like you're high value and some of the things you said happen to make them insecure. So my grandma has the same one, is just too overt, it's not good. But there are versions similar to this that would make it into, those advanced tiers and definitely be usable openers. And I've seen, pretty advanced guys use them successfully. Next one we have is, I like your item of clothing, like I like your dress, I like your shoes, whatever. You have a cool style. Okay. Now this one is very similar to one we just did a few minutes ago, which is I adore your look, right? But this one is better for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's more specific, and so it seems more in the moment, more like something you just noticed. Number two, it's longer. My issue with the I adore your style was there just wasn't enough there. There wasn't a full opener there. This one, just by virtue of being a little longer, giving a little more to it, is more likely to provoke a response. So it is actually a much better version of the same. So I don't even remember exactly what I gave the I adore your style one, but I'm going to give this one B tier, which I believe is at least a tier above it, or at least half a tier above it, because it is a better version of the same. It's much more natural. It's much more sort of like, it flows, it seems more normal, and it doesn't cut off abruptly with it, okay, now what? So I think this is pretty good. And you can actually say this a lot better. You could say something along the lines of, hey, I love the dress, cool look, or I love the dress, it's a very interesting look. Something like that is a little bit better than I love this, I love your style. The I love kind of thing is kind of bad. But the general gist, the general format is definitely a pretty good format. I wouldn't say it's tip top, but it's definitely decent. You are probably going to have to follow it up with something, but at least you're likely to get thanks. So you're going to get a positive response before you have to reopen, as opposed to just having to reopen cold. So it's pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's tip top. I wouldn't say it's A tier or S tier by any means, but it's certainly a solid high B, maybe at the very bottom of the A. Next one we have is another bold one. It's, so when do you want to share my company? This week or next week? And it certainly could be delivered better with a little more hesitation, a little more pauses. But in general, the issue with this one is that it is overly bold. Now, in general, I am a fan of bold openers. Like I said, it's better to be cocky, it's better to be noticed than to be overlooked or not get a response. But this particular one is just to like, hey, look at my pickup line. Look how cocky I can be. It's like you're treating being cocky as your source of value. It's like you've kind of realized that there's this button where if I push the cocky button, it gets a response, and you're almost like addicted to pushing the cocky button. It's too try hard. Nobody who's actually truly confident would do this, because you wouldn't feel the need to. Right? So it's very, very clearly leveling. I think it's actually a little bit on the bad side. I'm going to give this actually C tier. I'm going to give it high C tier because it could work sometimes, but you're just blowing out more girls than you need to. And you're going to get very negative reactions way more often than you need to. And you're going to just make game more like icky overall than you need to. Because game should be a situation where most of your interactions, even if they don't go somewhere, everybody leaves them feeling better. Whereas this is the kind of opener where people like feel like they have to compete with you and have to fight you and have to be like, ew, go away when they don't like you. So I don't like that aspect of it. And I also don't think it's going to be super high percentage. So it's just overly bold. I don't quite like it. I like what you're trying to do. I appreciate the effort. It comes from a reasonable place, but it just doesn't quite come off. Next one is another relatively cocky opener, but I think a better version of it, which is, hey, I think we should have a conversation before we get married. All right? Now, see, this one is, again, relatively bold, but it's at least kind of like metered bold. It has a positive with a negative. It's a little more playful. It's highly positive in general. It's not being like saying, I'm so amazing and so we should get married. It's not flat out saying I'm amazing. It's just kind of assuming it. So it's a little more subtle in that way. I don't like it as phrased. If you go up and say, hey, I think we should have a conversation before we get married, I think that's bad. However, with the right preamble and the right stuff around it, it could kind of work. If you're like, hey, sorry to bother you, but I'm doing some thinking, we probably should have a conversation or two before we just rush in and get married. I think that seems, it seems prudent, yes? Something like that is a much better delivery, whereas you actually thought it out, you're actually like building the joke a little bit, you're actually delivering it instead of just saying, hey, here's a line I'm spitting out. So there is a decent way to say this one. This one can absolutely never be anything like A tier because it's a little too contrived, it's a little too gimmicky, etc. But I do think it's toward the higher end of B tier. If you're going to do a gimmicky opener, this is a pretty good gimmicky opener, and it certainly beats a lot of the other ones that have been B tier on this list. So it has to go towards the top end of the B tier, in my opinion. Final opener for this video, and I do think it's an interesting one. It's, hey, you can't just look at me like that and walk away. My name's Todd, what's yours? Okay, so this one on its surface very much resembles the opener I already put in the S tier, which is noticing the reaction, commenting, very, very natural, etc. And this has that same element. Hey, you can't just look at me like that. It has that, I noticed, it's in the moment kind of thing. And actually, hey, don't give me that look would be a better version, right? Because it's a lot less like try hard, and it seems like how you'd actually normally talk to someone. So that's an immediate improvement that can be made. But that first part is kind of okay. But following it up with, my name's this, what's yours, is problematic. Because you started with teasing them, and then you're going to immediately escalate, right? And this just doesn't make sense. Because if you tease them, and then they respond to the tease, well, you're in a position of high value if they respond well to the tease. Now, there's no need to escalate because they're already chasing you, and why would you give back the value there? It really doesn't make sense. If you tease and it gets a bad response, well then saying my name's this, what's yours, now you're asking for something off a negative or asking for something off a shit test, which is a cardinal rule in game that you should absolutely not be doing that. So either of those outcomes, this is a very, very bad thing to follow it with. So the start's good, but the follow-up is almost universally going to be the wrong follow-up, right? And the second thing is it's a compound opener, which I really don't like, because the problem with compound long-winded openers is you're planning or assuming a particular response, and you're going to say this specific thing no matter what the response. That's usually a bad idea. Because in any opener, you're going to get a very wide range of responses, and you want to actually calibrate and adapt to the response she's specifically giving you rather than just blindly plow forward. So one, I don't like blindly plowing forward, and two, I think that in most cases, this follow-up is actually the wrong follow-up. So for these reasons, taking the reaction opener that's S tier and doing this with it, I think makes it probably B plus tier, A minus tier. We'll give it an A minus, but it significantly worsens actually we're going to give it B plus because I really hate the follow-up. We're giving it B tier. It goes down 2 tiers. I just don't like it. I hate the follow-up, and actually a good lesson, what you do after the opener probably matters more than the opener anyway. So a bad follow-up to the opener is probably worse than a bad opener. So it's going to kick it down 2 tiers for that. I just don't like it. I don't like that it's contrived. I don't like that it's poorly constructed. So that's it. Those are my openers. So like I said, all of those openers came from the Facebook group. They came from you. And if you like this video, let me know it. Let me know some other openers you'd like me to do. And I can certainly add to this tier list. I can certainly do other rankings, that kind of stuff. If you have other ideas like that, put them here. If you want, go join the Todd V Insiders Facebook group. Put them there. I'd love to hear from you. Hope you liked the video, and I'll see you next time.